Hello everyone, this is Ahmed again for Eduonix, and this is Beginning DevOps. In this section we are going to start introducing you to Vagrant for instant provisioning, so let's get started. So before we start defining what Vagrant is or how it can help you in your DevOps environment or in your DevOps workflow, let's have a look first at what virtualization is. Virtualization is not a new technology. It is as old as the early 1970s, and that might be a surprise for most of you. It has been a surprise for me personally, because for a very recent time I thought that virtualization was as late as the late 90s or even the early 2000s. But as a matter of fact, virtualization as a concept has been there since the very early computers were invented, and the company that started the whole thing was IBM, and it was searching for something that is called time sharing, which basically means that multiple machines can share the resources of a single hardware so they can work together. And of course the idea evolved and evolved till we have the modern virtualization, which has led to the cloud computing, which is the latest trend in the infrastructure technology. Virtualization simply refers to abstracting the hardware components of a machine so that it can operate multiple virtual machines sharing its own resources. Just one machine with 1 or 2 cores CPU, 8 or 16 gigabytes of RAM, and 500 gigabytes of disk, for example, and one motherboard. It can operate more than one machine using those same resources. So I can have 2 or 3 or more machines sharing the CPU cores, sharing the 16 gigabytes of memory, sharing the 500 gigabytes of hard drive, each of which is having an isolated environment, each of which does not have any idea that it is working on a shared component, that it is sharing its resources with other machine. It will work as if it was just installed on the physical hardware with nothing else. For example, the following diagram represents a machine called a host running a virtualization software called VirtualBox. It is able to spawn other machines, and those machines are called guests, and they are all running together. As you can see here, I can use a software that is built specifically for virtualization. This software is called VirtualBox, and there are other products in the market, like for example VMware and other products that are used specifically for making virtualization possible. So using such a software like Oracle VirtualBox, which we are actually going to use throughout this class, you can run several machines running several operating systems that are not related to each other by any means. So you can run Windows alongside Ubuntu, alongside Red Hat Linux, alongside SUSE, and each of which is going to run, as we have just mentioned, as if it was the only machine running on the hardware. So that was virtualization. What is Vagrant and how it fits inside the big picture? Vagrant is one of the DevOps tools that helps automate infrastructure provisioning. It works on top of one of the virtualization platforms like VirtualBox or VMware. So remember, Vagrant is not a virtualization platform in itself. You cannot just install Vagrant and use it as a virtualization platform. You cannot just install Vagrant and use it to build machines. Vagrant is a tool that operates on top of a virtualization platform. So if you want to install Vagrant, if you want to use Vagrant, you will have to have one of the virtualization platforms that we have just mentioned, either VirtualBox or VMware. And you can have a look at Vagrant official page. We're gonna visit that later in this section, and you can have a look at the documentation to know exactly which virtualization platforms are supported by Vagrant. At the moment, the most common virtualization platforms I am aware of are VirtualBox and VMware. In this class, we are going to use VirtualBox as our virtualization software, and Vagrant is going to operate on top of that. So, to understand what Vagrant does, consider the following example. You want to deploy the LAMP stack. LAMP stack is a very well-known set of software or set of applications that are used by web developers who are fond of working with Linux. So the LAMP stack stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. As a matter of fact, other stacks actually exist for PHP the developers use. Like for example, we have the WAMP stack, WAMP, which stands for Windows, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, or even MAMP for Mac, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. So consider that the developers in your environment wanted to deploy a LAMP stack on a Linux machine. So in order to do that, as a system administrator, the typical workflow will have the following steps. So you have to first download the ISO file for a Linux system, and let's say that it was an Ubuntu. Then you will have to configure the new virtual machine on VirtualBox, set up the disk, mount the ISO file as a virtual CD-ROM, and the other extra stuff that you have to do if you have worked before with VirtualBox or VMware. You know that you have to configure some of the options for the machine to work correctly. So this, of course, takes time. You will have to also start the installation by following the wizard, answering the questions, verifying the method of installation, which files, which packages will get installed, which packages won't get installed, what is the file system mapping, what is the hard disk and file system mapping, and other things that you will need to do throughout the installation. And of course, you have to perform the post-installation tasks. Once the installation is complete, you will have to create the necessary users and groups. You'll have to also download and configure Apache, PHP, the necessary Apache modules for PHP to work with Apache, and finally download and install MySQL and perform the necessary security procedures. As you can see now, this is a lot of work. This is a lot of time wasted. This is a lot of human intervention. And if you remember from section 1, if you have watched that section, DevOps is all about minimizing human intervention as much as possible and giving way to automation, giving way to getting things done as fast as possible and with the least error margin possible. So how can Vagrant achieve that? How can Vagrant minimize that time wasted? How can Vagrant minimize the human intervention? That is going to be the starting topic of next lecture, so see you next. Hello everyone, this is Ahmed again for Eduonix, and this is Beginning DevOps, section 2, in which we are introducing Vagrant as a DevOps tool for instant provisioning. In the previous lecture, we have seen how installing a LAMP stack on a virtual machine will take a considerably long time, maybe 3 or 4 hours to a full day. So how can Vagrant fit in? How can Vagrant automate the process? Let's have a look. So as we said, the previous procedure will take no less than 3 hours at best to complete. A clever administrator may write automation scripts that will speed things up. And that is a good action to be done by a system administrator, which is to automate tasks that can be automated using shell scripts. However, using shell scripts is still error prone because the script may not be adequate for all the scenarios, for all the environments. Maybe you will have to customize the environment further, install an extra module or remove an unneeded module and so on. So you'll have to make changes constantly to the script, and those changes of course may bring errors with them, and as we said, we need to minimize the error margin to the minimum. And you'll also take even more time if you want to create a clone environment. So you can automate creation of one environment, but what if you want to create 3 or 4 environments that are identical to each other or that have minimal differences between each other? You will have to create a separate script for each environment, and that of course will take a very long time. So Vagrant fills in the space by providing an already built virtual machine. You don't have to install or configure the operating system, and that is already done for you. The operating system is already installed, the users are already created, the necessary settings have been already configured for you, and in some cases the LAMP stack may be already installed for you. So depending on the type of box that you will use to install the image, it will have the prerequisites that you need, or it may not have them. And that brings us to the definition of a box. Vagrant uses boxes to provide the image for you. A box is like a template containing everything needed to spawn an image. So if you want to create a virtual machine using Vagrant, all what you have to do is download the necessary box for that image, whether that box contains the plain old operating system without anything installed, or you can have a box that has the LAMP stack, for example, already installed for you. And once the box is downloaded to your local machine, you can create as many machines as you need from that same box. You don't have to download the box again. And in a matter of seconds, you will have an operating system up and running for you. So, using a box, you can create as many machines as you need with the same configuration. And this means multiple LAMP stack machines created within seconds instead of hours or even days. So, in the first lap of this section, we are going to install Vagrant. And for the purposes of this class, I have chosen Microsoft Windows as my example system for demonstrating installing VirtualBox and Vagrant. But for the rest of this class, we're going to use my Mac machine. However, the procedures of installing VirtualBox and Vagrant may be slightly different on Ubuntu, Windows, and Mac. But the steps that follow, the steps for creating virtual machines, the steps of working with Vagrant is exactly the same whether you're using Windows, Mac, Linux, or even Unix. So I'm gonna demonstrate here how to install Vagrant and VirtualBox on a Windows machine, and the steps are almost identical with very minor changes. If you know how to install the package on your system, then you are already good to go. So let's have a look at our example system, which is a Windows. Okay, this is our Windows machine. Let's maximize it a little bit. And let's open our Internet Explorer, and I will just have to search for download VirtualBox, just like that. Okay, and I'll be taken to the downloads page of VirtualBox by Oracle. And as you can see here, VirtualBox is capable of being installed on Windows hosts, OS X hosts, Linux distributions, and Solaris distributions. Solaris here is a Unix, is one of the Unix flavors. So as you can see here, VirtualBox is very generous when it comes to installation options. So I'm gonna choose Windows hosts, and this is going to download the VirtualBox installable file to my system. I've already downloaded that before, so let's cancel the download and let's go to our downloads folder here. And as you can see here, I have VirtualBox. Let's double click on that. Okay, and it's just a wizard. You just have to click next and install, and of course it's gonna require elevated privileges to get installed. So if you're not an administrator, you will have to ask your administrator for the password, or you will have to have admin privileges to install VirtualBox. Just wait a few seconds till the installation wizard is complete, and as you can see here, it has been completed successfully. It's very easy to install, nothing new here. And once it's installed, I can just verify that it is installed by running it. Okay, and here we go. This is a VirtualBox. If you haven't seen it before, you can create new virtual machines from here. And as I have just mentioned in the previous lecture, if I want to install an Ubuntu machine, as you can see here, I will have to do lots of things. I have to configure the memory, I have to configure the disk and where it is located, and after that I will have to, of course, configure the installation itself and then install whatever software I need to install in that machine. So that is for VirtualBox, which is the prerequisite for installing Vagrant. Time to install Vagrant. So let's search for Vagrant. And actually, before Vagrant, before you start downloading and installing Vagrant, I strongly encourage you to install Cygwin. If you are running Windows, I strongly encourage you to install Cygwin. Cygwin, if you haven't heard that before, is a software that is used to create a Linux-like environment for Windows. This is not a prerequisite for Vagrant, but it will very much facilitate working with Vagrant. It will very much facilitate actually working with anything that is Linux-based or that needs a command line or a CLI. So you will have to just go to this part of the page, current Cygwin DLL version, and you will have just to click on that. Setup x86-64. If you are running a 32-bit Windows machine, you will have to click on that link. If you're running a 64-bit installation, which is most commonly you will have to click on that link. This will download the setup file for you. Okay, once it is downloaded, just double click on it and click next. It will just download and install Cygwin for you. Once it is downloaded, you will find an icon here on your desktop that is called Cygwin 64 terminal. Just double click on that and you have, as you can see here, a very Linux-like shell. Actually, it is a bash shell. Don't know if that will work. Okay, it's bin bash, so you have here bin bash as your shell. Okay, so if you're running Windows, I strongly encourage you to download Cygwin before you attempt to download Vagrant. So once you do, just go ahead and select your distribution. In our case, it's Windows. Of course, if you're running a Mac OS X like mine, or a CentOS or a Debian like Ubuntu, you will have to click on your relative link. But in my case, I'm demonstrating installing a Windows, so I'm gonna download the 64-bit Vagrant file or Vagrant installation file for Windows. And since it has been already downloaded, I'll have to cancel this download and go right to my downloads folder, double click on this Vagrant installation file, And again, Vagrant is one of the software that requires admin privileges, so you'll have to be an administrator on your machine or ask your administrator for the privileges. I'm not gonna change anything, I just leave it for the defaults, and it is going to install Vagrant for me. Yes, I'll have to accept the warning messages, because Vagrant, as we have just mentioned, is a virtualization tool, so it is going to make some changes to the drivers on your system, or actually it's going to install new drivers to abstract the hardware that you have on your machine. Okay, and the Vagrant setup has been completed successfully. Let's click finish. And okay, it is asking me to restart the system, so let's restart the system quickly. Okay, the system has been restarted successfully. Let's now have a look at Cygwin terminal. And you can also open your terminal, the normal terminal, and it will give you the same output. However, I'm using Cygwin because, as we have mentioned, it will facilitate working with Vagrant more than the traditional terminal of Windows. And once Vagrant is installed, it will place itself automatically in your path. So if I type vagrant.exe from anywhere on my system, it will just refer to the executable file. Don't have to type the full path of Vagrant. So I'll type Vagrant -- version, and this will give me the current installed version of Vagrant. At the time of this recording, it's 1.9.8. Congratulations, we can now use Vagrant. So since I have demonstrated that on the Windows machine, I'm gonna have to close it. So let's go to here, I guess. Okay, and power shutdown. And now let's get back to our terminal on my Mac. Type Vagrant -- version. I already have Vagrant installed. Okay, and it's Vagrant 1.9.7. I guess I'm gonna have to upgrade this before we start the next lecture. In the coming lecture, we are going to build our first Vagrant machine. We are going to build an Ubuntu machine using Vagrant. So see you next. Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Ahmed again for Eduonix, and this is Beginning DevOps, Section 2, an introduction to Vagrant as an instant provisioning tool. In the previous lecture, we have seen the installation of Vagrant on a test operating system. We have chosen Windows 10 for this demonstration. However, once you install Vagrant, which is very easy to install, whether you are on Windows, Linux, Mac OS X, or any other operating system that is supported by Vagrant, any procedure that is done on Vagrant is exactly the same. The same commands are going to be executed whether on Windows or Mac or Linux or even on Unix. So in this lecture, we are going to start by installing or creating our first Vagrant machine. But before we continue, I just want you to know that I have just downloaded Vagrant to have the latest version at the time of this recording, which is 1.9.8. So having Vagrant installed, we are ready now to create our first machine. But before we create the machine, you will have to understand something that is very important. Vagrant works in a directory-based mode. This means that each machine created in Vagrant has its own directory. If I want to create 2 or 3 or 4 machines using Vagrant, then each of those machines will have to have its separate directory, and within that directory, any Vagrant command that is issued is going to be affecting only the machine that is in the current directory. This is going to be demonstrated much better using an example, so let's have just one. So let's clear the screen and let's create a directory that is called Ubuntu, because we are going to create a machine that is based on Ubuntu. So mkdir Ubuntu, cd Ubuntu, those same commands can be run against a Windows if you are running Cygwin. And as I have just mentioned in the previous lecture, Cygwin is highly recommended to be installed on Windows if you are going to use Vagrant. Of course, if you are on a Mac or on a Linux or a Solaris system or a Unix system in general, you'll not find any problem using those commands because it inherently uses the bash shell or a Linux-based shell for operations. So once I'm inside the directory, and the command that we're going to use after we create the directory and cd inside the directory is called vagrant init. Vagrant init, just like that. Vagrant init is a command that is used to create a text file in the current directory. This text file is called vagrant file. One word, just vagrant file. I'm going to show it to you once we issue that command. And this vagrant file contains the instructions that Vagrant needs to deploy the box that will be used to create the machine. If that box is already deployed, nothing will happen. It just will point to that box, and Vagrant will use that box for creating the new machine. If it is not deployed already, it's gonna be downloaded from the Vagrant website. We're gonna have a look at this in a moment, and it's gonna deploy the box on your local machine first. Once the box is deployed, you can create, as we have just mentioned, as many machines as you need. So Vagrant init will be followed by the name of the box. In our case, or for the sake of this demonstration, we are going to use bento/ubuntu-16.10. You might ask, what is bento, or why there is a bento / before the Ubuntu? We all know Ubuntu, and 16.10 is just one of the latest versions of Ubuntu that are currently in the market or that are currently available for download. But what about bento? Bento is just a name for the box, a name that the creator of the box decided to be added to the box name, just for the sake of uniqueness, or just for the sake of being identified uniquely throughout the huge number of boxes that are available. I have chosen bento box because it contains the packages and files that will be used or that are needed throughout this demonstration in the class. There are many other boxes out there. I'm gonna show it to you either on the Vagrant website, the official Vagrant website, or it can be available on any other website that uses Vagrant or that provides Vagrant boxes. So in our case, we are instructing Vagrant to install bento/ubuntu-16.10. Pressing enter will create a Vagrant file for us. Just let's ls-ltr to give me the contents of the directory. As you can see now, I have a file that is called Vagrant file. One word, Vagrant, capital V, then file. Let's have a look at this Vagrant file to see what it contains. It contains a lot of text. Don't be intimidated. Most of that text is commented out, as you can see here. Any line that has a hash before it, or a pound sign if you wish to call it, is a commented line. This means that it is just a description or an explanation meant for humans to read and not for the machine. So as you can see here, I have a lot of explanation. The file is well commented. And have a look here. This is config.vm.box. This is the name of the box. This is where Vagrant is going to download and deploy the box. And as you can see here, every Vagrant development environment requires a box. You can search for boxes at, and it's giving me a URL. Let's have a look quickly at that URL just to demonstrate how you can use the search functionality of Vagrant on the web to search for different boxes. As you can see here, this is the website, and you have here a search button or search box on the left. Okay, the site wasn't fully loaded, now it is. And as you can see here, you can either search for boxes, or you can browse for the boxes. You can browse by the provider. In our case, we will need to have a look at VirtualBox because this is the provider that we are currently using. And as you can see, you have a lot of boxes. You have Ubuntu, you have Laravel. Laravel is a famous PHP framework. As you can see, that is what I meant by instant provisioning. If you download and install this box on your machine, you will instantly have a working Laravel machine. Laravel is a PHP framework that is used to develop web applications or run web applications. You will instantly have Laravel framework installed with all its prerequisites, PHP and the other prerequisites that Laravel needs. It will also have a database, MySQL, installed and configured. It will just run out of the box, as they say. Have CentOS 7. Lots of boxes are available. You can even search here for the box that you need. So for example, I may be interested in a box that contains Eduonix already installed. As you can see here, I have some boxes that contain Eduonix here with the Apache web server. You get the point. Okay, let's get back to our terminal. And that is what I mean by a box. And this is the site from where the boxes get downloaded. But as we have just mentioned, you can download the box from whatever website you need. You can even create your own boxes, put them online in your website, and download them whenever you want. Okay, let's exit that. And once you have initialized the directory by running Vagrant init and the Vagrant file is in place, the next thing you have to do is just use Vagrant up, just like that. And Vagrant up is going to import, as you can see here, it's going to import the box. And if that box is not already installed on your machine, or it's not already deployed on your machine, it's going to be downloaded from the internet. And once it is downloaded, it will be stored in some location on your local machine, and it's not going to be downloaded again. Whenever you want to create a machine, like it is being created now it's creating a machine for us using that box, it will not download the box again. It will just use the box that has been already downloaded. Okay, so in a few seconds it's gonna be up and running. Okay, and now the machine has been installed successfully, or it has been deployed successfully. If you want to access the machine, you are gonna access it using SSH. However, you're gonna use a special command for accessing the machine, and actually all the commands that you are going to use to work with Vagrant machines will have to be preceded by Vagrant. So Vagrant up, Vagrant hold, Vagrant suspend, Vagrant SSH, Vagrant box, and so on and so forth. You will have to write Vagrant then a subcommand. So in order to access the machine using SSH, you are going to type Vagrant followed by SSH, just like that. Vagrant followed by SSH will establish a connection, an SSH connection between the local host and the guest machine. And as you can see here, let's just clear the screen. I am logged in inside the Ubuntu machine, and I'm using the Vagrant user, which is the default user that gets created once the machine is up and running. Actually, all this can be changed inside the Vagrant file, but if you don't have a strong reason to change that user, just leave it as it is. Okay, so congratulations, you have just created your first Vagrant machine, and in the coming lecture we are going to learn how we can interact more with that machine, how we can share files between the host and the guest. So until then, see you next. Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Ahmed again for Eduonix, and this is beginning DevOps section 2. And in this section we are discussing Vagrant as a way of instant provisioning and a way to facilitate and automate infrastructure provisioning in your DevOps workflow. In the previous lecture we have successfully created our first Vagrant machine, which is an Ubuntu 16.10 installation. And as you can see here, once I install the machine and I accessed it using the Vagrant SSH command, I have a fully working Ubuntu machine with file systems already created for me, with a user created for me automatically. Everything is just in place. I am ready just to work or to do whatever work I need to do with an Ubuntu machine. I don't have to download the ISO of the internet. I don't have to configure a virtual machine or VirtualBox to start the installation. I don't have to answer the questions during the installation, configure a root password, and so on and so forth. All this has been just configured for me, and it takes only a few seconds to get a machine up and running. And I create as many machines as I need, as I've just mentioned. All what I need to do is just create a separate directory for each machine, and then using Vagrant init and Vagrant up, I can launch machines in a matter of seconds. Okay. I guess the first task that you need to do once you have created a virtual machine is to install something on that machine. And in order to install anything on the machine, you will need to have an installation file or a source file. So you will have to transfer files from the host to the guest. Of course, if you've been working with Linux for some time, you will instantly come up with ideas like, why don't we use an rsync or an scp command to transfer files from the host to the Vagrant machine or to the guest machine using SSH. Or you might ask, why don't we create an FTP site or an FTP server on the machine and use it to transfer files from the host to the guest and vice versa. However, Vagrant has much easier idea than all of this. It automatically creates a shared directory for you. Yes, a shared directory gets automatically created between the guest machine and the host machine, and that shared directory is called /vagrant. This file system, as you can see here, by running df-h, which shows you the file systems that are currently on the machine, we have /vagrant, and /vagrant is a shared directory between you and between the Vagrant machine and the host machine. Any files that are placed in this directory are instantly visible and accessible to the host machine and vice versa. So let's have a quick experiment or an example. Let's go inside Vagrant and ls. As you can see here, I have the Vagrant file. The Vagrant file is available here because this is the directory where the machine is installed. Remember when I told you that any Vagrant machine has to have its own directory? This is the directory where Ubuntu is installed, and this is the Vagrant file that was used to install the machine. So let's create a new file from the Ubuntu. Let's say, for example, I want to create hello.txt, and let's write some text inside that file. Let's say hello from Ubuntu, just to prove that this file has been created from inside Ubuntu. Now let's exit by pressing on Ctrl D or typing exit, whatever means you use to exit an SSH session. And once I'm inside the directory where the Vagrant machine is installed, I can just run ls. I can just run ls-lr-ltr, and as you can see here, I have a loaded text. If I cat that text, I can see hello from Ubuntu. Let's have the other way around. Hello to, for example, and let's say hello from the host. Save Vagrant SSH. Let's get inside Vagrant again, and hello to, hello from host. So as you can see here, I have two-way file sharing capability automatically created for me using Vagrant without me having to go through all the hassle of configuring shared directories or shared folders in VirtualBox and creating a VxBox user or whatever that name was. You have to create a user on your virtual machine and give that user full permission on the shared directory, and you will have to pass through all this hassle just to create a shared directory between the guest and the host. Vagrant just eases the thing for you, just creates the shared directory by default once you install the machine. So how awesome is this? How time saving is this? How less human intervention is used? Of course, a lot. So let's clear the screen and let's have a look at this sharing capability. It actually is, this is actually inside the Vagrant file. Just search for, if you have a look here at this stanza, maybe I will just set in new just to, okay, just to bring on the line numbers, and at line 42 approximately, maybe it's 1 or 2 lines before or after depending on your installation. And as you can see here in this stanza, share an additional folder to the guest VM. The first argument is the path to the host to the actual folder, and the second argument is the path to the guest to mount the folder. So I can create another folder, another shared directory like this. Let's say, for example, that I need to share a directory that is called data, and this directory is going to be shared inside my virtual machine as /vagrant /vagrant_data. Let's save this file, and of course I will have to create a directory that is called data first, otherwise that won't work. And since I made changes to the Vagrant file, and that is something that you need to remember, I need to run Vagrant reload. Whenever you make any changes to the Vagrant file, you will need to run Vagrant space reload in order to inform Vagrant that something has changed to the Vagrant file and that it needs to reread the file and apply the changes that have been found there. Vagrant reload is just going to restart the machine gracefully. It's just gonna do a graceful shutdown of the virtual machine, so don't worry if you have something running, if you have a server running or anything that you don't need it to be, that you're not needed to crash. Don't worry, Vagrant will attempt a graceful shutdown for the system, and then it's gonna restart it, boot it again with the same settings, and it is going to read the Vagrant file again before attempting to load the machine. Okay, and if you notice here, during this startup messages, you're gonna find that I have /vagrant, which is the official or the default root or the default share, and I also have Vagrant_data has been created for me. This points to /users /Ahmad al-Fakhrani, which is my home directory /data. So let's go to that /data and let's create a text file. Let's call it my data.txt, and let's write this file contains additional data. Okay, now let's type Vagrant SSH. Okay, I'm not inside the directory, and that is one thing to remember. Always run any Vagrant command inside the directory where Vagrant is installed. If you attempted to run any Vagrant command outside the target machine, as you can see here, you will receive that error message. A Vagrant environment or target machine is required to run this command. So I return back to the Ubuntu directory, and I'm gonna issue again Vagrant SSH to get inside. And once I'm inside, I can have a look. Let's first type df-h, and as you can see here, I have a new file system here, shared file system /vagrant_data. Let's clear the screen and let's go to that Vagrant_data ls-ltr, and as you can see, I have my data containing, this file contains additional data. So the last thing we're going to discuss in this lecture is how you can completely disable file sharing. Maybe for some security reasons you need to disable file sharing. You don't need any file sharing between the host and the guest. So in order to do that, all what you have to do is just inform Vagrant that you don't want the default share to be present. So I will point to the current directory, which is the current directory of the machine, which is the default share, which is by default shared to /vagrant, and also by default not written in this file. I'm gonna write it, and then I'm going to add disabled true, just like that. Disabled true means that I need to disable file sharing, even the default one. Save the file, type Vagrant, reload again to reread the file and effect any changes. Okay, and now let's Vagrant SSH again to the machine, df-h, and as you can see here, I no longer have /vagrant in the output of df-h. This means that I do not have any shared directory between the host and the guest. So in this lecture we have learned about file sharing between the Vagrant machine and the host machine that is hosting that guest. In the coming lecture we are going to learn about network communication in Vagrant, how to communicate with network services that are running on your Vagrant machine. So until then, see you next. Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Ahmed for Eduonix, and this is beginning DevOps section 2, and in this section we are discussing Vagrant as a method for instant provisioning. In the previous lectures we have seen how to install Vagrant, how Vagrant adds to the workflow of DevOps, and how it greatly decreases the time needed to set up new machines. And in the previous lecture we have seen how Vagrant also facilitates file sharing out of the box between the host machine and the guest machine. In this lecture we're going to start by defining how we can communicate with the Vagrant machine using the network services, how we can access network services that may be running on that machine. You will definitely need to access network services running on the guest machine. For example, let's say that we have a web server that is running here. Let's sudo apt get update. We need to install a web server here. So we are going to have to sudo get apt update, which is an Ubuntu command that is used to just make sure that the package resources are up to date. Okay, once done, let's sudo apt get install Apache 2. Okay, Apache 2 is of course the famous web server. We are gonna install it just to see what happens when we try to access a network service that is running on the guest machine. Okay, so now the Apache web server has been installed. Let's sudo systemctl start Apache 2. Okay, and now it is started. Let's just ensure that it is. Okay, it is running. Now I need to access that Apache web server from my host machine or from the outside network. Vagrant supports 3 modes of network access to the guest machine. Choose the one that best suits your needs. So we have either port forwarding, and port forwarding means that you will access the guest network services through the host's IP address followed by a port. Traffic arriving at the host's IP address and port will be forwarded to the guest network. So if I want to access the web server that is running on the guest machine on port 80, and if I have configured port forwarding in the Vagrant file to forward traffic that is coming at port 8080 to port 80, this means that if I need to access the network service that is running on the guest machine, which is the Apache web server, I will have to type in the address of my local machine, which is, like, say 127.0.0.1 or simply localhost, followed by a colon followed by 8080 for the port number, and any traffic arriving at that address will be automatically forwarded to the guest machine. I will access the guest machine through this address. So that is one option. The second option is to use a private network, and the private network is where the guest will share an internal network with the host. It will have its own IP address, but only the host and other guests running on the same host will access it. In this option, you can access the Vagrant guest machine from the host, as well as from other guest machines or other Vagrant machines that are using the same internal network. However, you cannot access a Vagrant machine from outside the internal network. Only the host and other machines on the same network can access this machine. The last option we have is the public network. The public network is where the guest will be fully accessible from the internal network as well as the external one. This means that the Vagrant machine will bear an IP address that can be reached the same way the host is reached on the network. It's going to be just another device on the network, just like any other computer or any other network device on the network, on the external network. So it can be accessed from the host either internally or externally from other hosts, and that is the public network. Of course, all those settings can be configured in the Vagrant file. So let's, for example, configure the first option, which is port forwarding, and see how we can access our machine from the host. So here we are. Let's just exit and go to our Vagrant file, and let's again set NU to reveal the numbers. And in my Vagrant file, it's at line 26. We have configured the VM.network, and we can change here the option from forward a port to private network to public network, depending on your needs. So this is automatically configured for me. I just uncommented the line. It is going to forward all the traffic that is coming at the host at port 8080 to the guest at port 80, and the guest is running an Apache web server. So let's just save the file like that and issue Vagrant reload in order to reread the configuration and apply any changes that have been or that have occurred in the file to the Vagrant machine. So it is attempting to gracefully shut down the VM, and once it is up and running again, we will resume. Okay, the machine now is starting, and notice here at log messages that gets printed when the machine starts is that it is forwarding, it's informing you that it's forwarding the ports 80 to the port 8080 on the host machine on adapter 1. So let's have a look at our browser on our host. Okay, and let's type localhost followed by 8080. Okay, and as you can see here, I have Apache 2 Ubuntu default page. It works. This is the default page for Apache, and this, if you have worked with Apache before or Ubuntu, this is the page that informs you that you have successfully installed the Apache web server on Ubuntu. This means that port forwarding is working correctly and successfully. You can access any network service on the guest machine just by specifying which port is going to be forwarded on which port on the guest machine. So in our case, we are forwarding port 8080 to port 80 on the guest machine. So in this lecture, we have learned how we can access network services on our Vagrant machine. In the next lecture, we're going to see how we can handle the machine shutdown, stopping, starting, restarting, and suspending the Vagrant machine. So until then, see you next.